The thing that some of you, I'm sure, know is that we have been around 100 years this year, which is quite extraordinary. Do any of you know the history of the CIPD? Well, the history of, we started 100 years ago at the Roundtree factory in York. And the symmetry of what we were doing then in those days is with what we are talking about today is just extraordinary, because it started as the Welfare Workers Association, which was a group of, I suppose, what you might today term occupational psychologists, or certainly welfare workers at the Roundtree factory, who recognised that a well workforce was going to be a more productive workforce. And I've got another picture which actually doesn't illustrate it, but you can look at pictures of the Roundtree factory going back to 1913, and there they are all in the quadrangle of the factory doing star jumps at lunchtime. I'm not kidding, right? So that's what they felt. I mean, they felt a well worker, a physically well worker, and to some extent, I suppose they understood the notion of an emotionally well worker was going to be a better and more productive worker. The other thing that they did at that time, and that's the genesis of this picture, was that they also wanted to get children out of the factory. I mean, look at the age of some of those people there, out of the factory and into work. Now, the other symmetry with, that's a big campaign for us at the moment in the CIPD, called Learning to Work, which is actually, of course, trying to do the reverse, trying to get young people out of education and into work, the education to work transition. So there's some neat symmetries with 100 years ago, and I just find it fascinating. In some ways, there's nothing new under the sun. I mean, we're talking about well-being now, and rightly so, but all the way 100 years ago, and probably beyond that, people naturally recognized that somebody who was well, in every sense, was likely to be more engaged, more connected, and more productive. Today, wind the clock forwards, and of course we live in a really fascinating time. And some of you might say, oh my God, well, fascinating translate as seriously challenging. But it is. I think we live in really interesting times with a lot of change going on, and I see that in many ways this is an inflection point for our profession, for HR, a real inflection point. And interesting, the use of the word resilience, and people use the word resilience a lot, and it's not a bad word, but sometimes it can feel like, well, that's, I've got to fight the world, and it's all about barriers and things. So a notion we talk a lot about in connection to resilience is this notion of agility and adaptability. And Ryan, when you talked about resilience and change management, this is part of the connection. So how do we become more agile and adaptive, and what does that really mean? And so what are the different drivers, if you will, that are shaping therefore the future of HR and all of this? And we've started to put together a framework that reflects that, quite a simple framework, which says there are a number of things that are quite significantly now going to shape the future of HR. And we have got to move away from the world of HR of a bit of an obsession around process and the Ulrich model. You all know what I mean by the Ulrich model? Well, interestingly, when you talk to David, we're doing quite a lot with David Ulrich at the moment, he said, that wasn't what I was saying. He was not saying that what we needed to do in HR was create shared services and business partners and those things. He said we needed to actually see how we drove more value through HR, but as an operating model, doing shared services and business partners is a good thing to do. And incidentally, because that model is the exact same model that every other, whatever you want to call it, back office enabling function has been going through. IT, marketing, accounting and finance. There's magic in it. But it has been, I think, a little bit of an obsession about how do we get our processes more efficient versus saying, what is it that we're trying to do here?